The sky above the Great Plains was a harsh, relentless blue, the kind that burned the eyes and made every movement under its gaze seem sharper, more deliberate. Take, the Comanche leader, felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders as he crouched behind a jagged rock formation, scanning the rolling expanse of grass that stretched in every direction. His warriors, loyal and fierce, waited in tense silence, each man gripping his weapon tightly, ears straining to catch even the slightest sign of the approaching enemy. Today was unlike any other. Rumors had spread through the neighboring tribes that a militia, armed with rifles and ammunition, far beyond what the Comanche could muster, was advancing to claim this land. For generations, this stretch of plains had been home to Take's people, a sacred place where the wind whispered stories of ancestors, where the herds grazed, and where children learned the rhythms of the earth. The thought of losing it was unbearable. "Steady," Take whispered, his eyes narrowing against the glare of the sun. "Do not let fear rule your hands. We fight not for glory, but for survival." His warriors, men who had grown up alongside him, nodded. The younger ones clenched their teeth, trying to mask their anxiety. Even the bravest among them felt the weight of the enemy's numbers. Take's mind, however, remained clear. He had faced impossible odds before, and while he respected the enemy's might, he also understood the land in ways they never could. The first wave of attackers appeared suddenly, riding like a storm across the plains. The sound of hooves hitting dry soil was deafening, the dust rising in thick clouds that swallowed the horizon. Take's heart pounded as arrows were loosed from both sides, whistles cutting the air like knives. The clash was immediate and violent. Steel met bone, shouts of pain and rage mingled with the cries of horses, and the smell of smoke and blood filled the air. Take moved like a shadow among his men, every step precise, every swing of his spear calculated. He was a man who embodied both strength and strategy, a leader whose presence could inspire courage even in the bleakest of circumstances. He noticed the enemy's flaws, their reliance on formation, their hesitation in the open terrain, and exploited them expertly. Small victories came, one after another, but Take knew that each came at a price. Hours passed, the sun descending slowly, its warm light turning the dust clouds into golden smoke. The warriors fought with the desperation of those who understood what was at stake. Take's heart ached as he saw familiar faces fall, men who had grown up with him, whose families would mourn them, whose absence would be felt for generations. And yet he pressed on, unwilling to let despair take root. Then came the betrayal. It was subtle at first, a movement out of place, a hesitation where there should have been loyalty. Take's instincts screamed, but it was too late. One of his closest allies, a man he had trusted like a brother, turned suddenly and fired an arrow directly at him. Take barely had time to react, twisting just enough for the shaft to graze his chest. But the poisoned tip found its mark. Pain exploded in his body, sharp and consuming. He fell to the ground, the earth beneath him hard and unyielding. Shock and disbelief coursed through him. How could someone he trusted betray him in the midst of battle? The world around him spun, a dizzying whirl of colors, sounds, and smells. He tried to call out, to warn his remaining warriors, but his voice failed him. The enemy pressed forward, unaware of the life that still lingered in the man they assumed was dead. They had no reason to look back, no reason to consider that the greatest obstacle in their path had not yet fallen. Take's vision blurred as he lay among the fallen, the dry grass sticking to the sweat and blood that coated his body. The pain was relentless, radiating through his chest and limbs, yet beneath it, a quiet fury grew. He refused to succumb, not entirely. His eyes fluttered as he struggled to remain conscious, and in the haze, he became aware of movement. Pause. A small figure approached, moving with careful determination. Take squinted, unable at first to comprehend what he saw. It was a girl, no older than 8 or 9, her dark hair tied back in a simple braid, her eyes wide and unflinching. She stepped over fallen bodies with a grace that belied her age, stopping only a few feet away from him. Her name was Nayeli. She had hidden in the tall grass as the battle unfolded, her family long gone, seeking shelter wherever they could. When she saw Take fall, a mixture of fear and courage welled up inside her. She had heard the stories of the Comanche leader, the tales of his wisdom, his strength, and his fairness. Something about him, about the injustice of him being left to die, moved her to act. "You mustn't die," she whispered, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I won't let them take you." Take could barely lift his head to see her. Her small frame seemed insignificant against the vastness of the plains and the brutality of the battle. Yet there was an undeniable determination in her eyes that touched something deep within him. In that moment, he realized that survival did not depend solely on strength or experience. Sometimes, it depended on courage and compassion in its purest form. Nayeli knelt beside him, carefully removing the remnants of her dress and tearing it into strips. She pressed them against the wound, tying them as best she could, her hand shaking but steady. Take gritted his teeth at the pain, the poisoned arrow having already done its work. Yet he remained silent, knowing she would not be able to succeed if he panicked. The sun dipped further, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Nayeli worked tirelessly, whispering words of encouragement and reassurance. She reminded him of the stories of his victories, the lives he had protected, and the courage that had always defined him. Each word, each movement, infused him with a renewed sense of determination. He was not merely fighting to survive. He was fighting because someone believed he should. Night fell, and with it came a chill that seeped into Take's bones. Nayeli's small hands had grown raw from binding and tending to him, but she did not falter. She helped him sit, supporting him as best she could, and began the slow, painstaking process of moving him toward safety. Every step was agonizing, every breath a struggle, but Take marveled at her strength, the strength of a child whose heart refused to surrender. As they moved, the stars began to emerge, scattering silver light across the plains. The world was quiet now, the echoes of battle fading into the night. Yet in that quiet, there was a profound sense of hope. Take realized that the course of a life, or even a battle, could turn on the smallest of actions, the smallest of hands. Nayeli's bravery had given him a chance at life, at healing, and perhaps at something even greater, a renewed understanding of trust, courage, and the unexpected bonds that can save a life. By the time they reached a sheltered hollow where they could rest, Take's wound was secure enough to keep him from bleeding further, though the pain still throbbed relentlessly. Nayeli gently helped him lie down, placing her hand on his chest to steady him. "You're going to live," she said softly. I promise. Take, exhausted beyond words, let his eyes close for a moment. In that brief rest, he understood that today had marked not only a battle for land, but a battle for life, trust, and the human spirit. Betrayal had nearly claimed him, yet the courage of a child, a girl no older than his niece, had turned the tide in his favor. He had survived, not because of skill alone, but because someone, small and fragile in appearance, had shown an unwavering bravery that surpassed his own. And so the story began, not with victory, not with defeat, but with survival, courage, and the fragile, extraordinary bond between a Comanche leader and a little girl who refused to let him die. The plains, silent now under the blanket of night, seemed to acknowledge this bond, carrying the whisper of a new beginning across the grass, into the wind, and into the hearts of all who would hear the tale. The night had deepened over the plains, a blanket of ink and silver stars stretching endlessly above. Take lay in a hollow, sheltered by a small cluster of rocks, the wound in his chest aching like a drum of relentless pain. Every breath was a struggle, every heartbeat a reminder of how fragile life had become. Yet, despite his suffering, there was one constant, a small hand gripping his arm, steady and resolute. Nayeli had refused to leave him alone. She had scavenged what she could from the battlefield, strips of cloth, a canteen half filled with water, and a small satchel with dried meat. She had fashioned a makeshift sling to support Take's weight, but moving him across the uneven terrain was proving to be far more difficult than she had imagined. The plains, beautiful and vast by day, had become an unending maze of hardship at night. Every step was a battle against fatigue, against the cold wind that cut through her thin dress, and against the fear that Take might succumb to his wounds before they could reach safety. "Stay with me," Take whispered, his voice hoarse but commanding even in weakness. "You've done enough already, little one." Nayeli shook her head, eyes bright with determination despite the chill. "I can't leave you," she said. "You saved our land, our people. Now, I'm saving you. That's what we do." Her words, though simple, carried the weight of a vow. Take's eyes softened. He had led men into battles, faced betrayal and death, but he had never felt such raw, unyielding courage in someone so young. She was small, fragile even, yet the strength of her heart defied her size. For a brief moment, he forgot the pain in his chest, replaced instead by admiration, gratitude, and something he could not yet name. They began moving slowly, carefully. Nayeli supported him as best she could, resting him on her shoulder when the ground tilted, or letting him lean against a boulder when the weight became unbearable. The journey was slow, agonizingly slow, but there was no other choice. Every step forward was a small victory, a testament to resilience, and a refusal to surrender to the night or the memory of betrayal that still haunted Take. The plains were quiet now, the chaos of battle replaced by the whispers of the wind through tall grasses. Crickets chirped, and the occasional owl hooted from a distant tree line, their sounds eerie yet strangely comforting. Take's vision blurred intermittently, his body weakening with every movement. Nayeli, noticing his labored breathing, lowered him to the ground, pressing her small hands against his chest to steady him. "You have to keep going," she said firmly. "We're almost there." Take coughed, wincing as the motion pulled at his wound. "Almost. Where?" he asked weakly. "To my home," she replied. There's water, food, and a place to rest. You'll be safe there. Take allowed himself a faint smile, though it was tinged with pain. In all his years, he had led men to safety, but never had he imagined being rescued by a child. Nayeli's courage, her unwavering resolve, had become the thread that kept his will to live intact. The journey was not without danger. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist along the plains, and Take felt the lingering threat of enemies or wild predators. Nayeli, aware of the possible dangers, moved cautiously, her eyes scanning every shadow, every sound. Her small frame darted like a fox through the underbrush, alert and agile, carrying Take piece by piece when the terrain grew treacherous. Hours passed. The moon rose high, silver and cold, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. Take's body ached with every step, yet he drew strength from Nayeli's unwavering courage. Her chatter, quiet, yet persistent, filled the night. She told him stories of her family, of the animals she loved, and of the dreams she held for the future. Each word was a distraction, a lifeline, a gentle encouragement that kept the darkness at bay. At one point, Take nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Nayeli barely managed to steady him against a large rock, her arms trembling from the effort. Tears stung her eyes, not from fear, but from the intensity of her determination. She whispered fierce promises to him, promising that she would not allow the land's defender to die on her watch. Take's mind, fogged by pain and fatigue, clung to her words like a drowning man to a rope. "Why do you care so much?" he asked softly. Curiosity mingled with gratitude. Nayeli's eyes, wide and earnest, met his. "Because someone has to. Because if no one tries, everything ends. And you're important, not just to me, but to all of us." Take's heart swelled at her words. He had led men into battle, inspired warriors, and defended his people with unmatched skill. Yet it was the courage of a child, simple, pure, and unwavering, that rekindled a fire in him that he had thought nearly extinguished. By the time they reached the small grove where Nayeli's family lived, the first light of dawn was breaking across the horizon, painting the plains in pale gold and pink. Take was barely conscious, his body drained and weak, but he felt a surge of relief as the familiar sight of human habitation came into view. Nayeli, sensing the final stretch, summoned her last reserves of energy, lifting him over rocks, guiding him across shallow streams, and shielding him from the wind. Finally, they reached a small, simple dwelling. Nayeli called out for help, her voice trembling with exhaustion and relief. Within moments, adults emerged, drawn by her shouts. They took one look at Take and immediately understood the severity of his condition. With careful hands, they carried him inside, laying him on a makeshift bed, and began tending to his wounds more thoroughly. Take's eyes remained half-closed, but he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The danger of the plains had passed, the immediate threat neutralized, and he was safe, thanks to Nayeli. His thoughts wandered, reflecting on the irony and beauty of the situation. A child, small and seemingly powerless, had defied the odds and carried the burden of saving a Comanche leader. Nayeli remained at his side, sitting on the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing the damp hair from his forehead. Take reached out weakly, placing a hand over hers. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the bond formed in the crucible of battle and survival. "You did it," he whispered, voice barely audible. You saved me. Nayeli's lips curved into a faint, proud smile. We saved you, she corrected softly, because you're not alone anymore, and because courage comes in all sizes. As the sun rose higher, spilling warmth across the room, Take realized that this journey, the long, grueling trek across the plains, had changed him. He had faced betrayal, near death, and the harsh reality of his vulnerability. Yet he had also encountered an unexpected hero in the form of a little girl. Nayeli had taught him that bravery was not measured by size, age, or strength alone, but by the willingness to act when others might falter. And so, as the morning light illuminated the room, Take closed his eyes, not in despair or weakness, but in gratitude and reflection. The plains outside were vast and untamed, the world full of danger and uncertainty. Yet within the warmth of this small dwelling, with Nayeli at his side, he felt a spark of hope ignite. A hope that even in the darkest of nights, courage, compassion, and resilience could light the way forward. The first light of morning streamed through the small wooden window of Nayeli's family home, dust motes dancing in the golden sunbeams. Take lay on the makeshift bed, wrapped in coarse blankets, his breathing steadier but still shallow. The wound in his chest, though stabilized by Nayeli's quick thinking and her family's care, remained raw and painful. Every breath reminded him of how close he had come to death, and yet, for the first time in hours, he felt a flicker of safety. Nayeli sat beside him on a small stool, her eyes never leaving his face. She had spent the night tending to him, changing the bandages she had applied, bringing him water, and whispering words of encouragement whenever his eyes fluttered open in pain. Take had been a warrior his entire life, but he had never known patience like this. Patience and courage combined in the body of a child. Good morning, she whispered softly, brushing a lock of damp hair from his forehead. Take managed a faint smile, wincing at the effort. Morning, he rasped. You never sleep, do you? Nayeli shook her head. Someone has to keep watch. You can't trust the plains to stay safe by themselves. Her eyes, wide and earnest, met his. And besides, I promised I'd stay with you. I don't break promises. Take's chest tightened, not from pain, but from an unfamiliar emotion stirring in his heart. He had faced countless enemies, survived ambushes, and witnessed betrayal in its most lethal forms. Yet he had never been cared for like this. Not by warriors, not by friends, never. Nayeli's bravery, her relentless vigilance, and her unwavering presence sparked something within him he could not yet name. Days passed slowly. Take's strength returned incrementally, aided by the warmth of the hearth and the gentle care of Nayeli and her family. Each day brought small victories. First, the ability to sit without pain, then to stand briefly, then to walk short distances. Nayeli continued to support him, often insisting he rest while she fetched water or gathered food. Her determination never wavered, and Take began to rely on her in ways that went beyond physical support. During these long, quiet hours, conversations began to blossom between them. Nayeli asked about his life, his people, and the battles he had fought. Take, initially hesitant, found himself opening up, sharing stories of his childhood, his leadership, and even the moments of doubt he had faced. Nayeli listened with rapt attention, her eyes wide with admiration, occasionally asking questions that were sharp and insightful beyond her years. You weren't afraid? She asked one afternoon as she handed him a cup of warm broth. Take shook his head slowly. Fear is always there, he admitted. The trick is to recognize it, but not let it control you. Even the strongest warriors feel it. Naeli considered this for a moment. So you felt it? And still fought? Take nodded. Yes. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. The girl's lips curved into a small, thoughtful smile. Then I guess I'm a little brave too, she said softly, because I didn't leave you. Take's eyes softened. The child's insight, her understanding of courage, mirrored the wisdom he had always valued in his own warriors. Yet this was different. It was pure, untainted by ambition or pride. It was simple, honest courage, born of compassion. He realized in that moment that trust and bravery could be found even in the smallest of hands. As Take's body healed, his mind began to shift from survival to reflection. He thought about the betrayal that had nearly ended his life, about the faces of his fallen warriors, and about the enemy who had underestimated both him and the land he knew so intimately. But he also thought of Naeli, her courage, her determination, and her refusal to let him die. Slowly, he realized that the bond forming between them was more than gratitude. It was trust, the kind that could only develop in the crucible of shared hardship and near death. One morning, as the wind stirred the dry grass outside, Take attempted to rise from the bed without Naeli's support. He stumbled slightly, pain flashing through his chest, but he steadied himself, leaning heavily on a nearby chair. Naeli's eyes widened in concern. "You need help," she said quickly, moving closer. "I want to try," Take replied firmly, gritting his teeth. "I have been weak too long. I must regain my strength for myself and for my people." The girl studied him, a mixture of worry and admiration in her gaze. Slowly, she nodded. "All right, but if you fall, I won't let you stay down." That day marked the beginning of a new routine. Take exercised carefully, slowly walking around the small dwelling, building strength with each step. Naeli followed, her hand always nearby, ready to catch him if he faltered. With every movement, every small victory, their bond deepened. The warrior learned to trust her instincts, and Naeli learned the nuances of care, patience, and responsibility. Evenings were quieter. By the fire, Take and Naeli would sit side by side, sharing stories of the past, laughter mingling with moments of reflection. Take taught her about the stars and the constellations that guided his people, about the wind patterns that foretold storms, and about the sacred rites that connected the Comanche to the land. Naeli listened intently, absorbing every detail, occasionally asking questions that sparked lively discussion. "You have seen so much," she said one night, looking at him with awe. "How do you not get afraid again?" Take paused, considering. "Because fear is only part of life," he replied. "It does not define us. What defines us is how we respond. I could have given up on the plains, on my people, on myself, but I didn't. And now I have someone who reminds me why life is worth fighting for." Naeli blushed, looking down at her hands. I just did what felt right." Take reached out, placing a firm hand over hers. "And that is why it matters. Actions born of what is right, not what is easy, are the ones that change the world." Over the following days, Take's strength returned steadily. He could walk longer distances, lift small weights, and even begin simple exercises to restore his stamina. Yet the healing was not only physical. His mind and heart, burdened by betrayal and near death, you're beginning to find peace. Naeli's presence had rekindled a sense of hope and connection he had fought lost. Trust, he realized, was not given lightly. It had to be earned, nurtured, and protected. Nayeli had earned his trust in ways no adult, no warrior could have matched. And he had come to understand that courage, compassion, and resilience could manifest in forms one would never expect, even in the heart of a child. One afternoon, as they walked along the edge of the grove to collect water, Nayeli suddenly stopped, staring at the horizon. "Do you think we'll ever go back to the plains?" she asked softly, a hint of worry in her voice. Take looked toward the land that had been both his battleground and his home. "Yes," he said after a pause, "but we will go back stronger. We will protect what is ours, and we will honor those who could not survive. And we will make sure no child, no matter how small, ever has to carry such a burden alone." Nayeli smiled, a mixture of relief and pride. "Then I'm ready," she said confidently. "I'll help you." Take's heart swelled. He had been a leader among men, a warrior who had faced death countless times. Yet it was Nayeli, her courage, her insight, and her unwavering presence that had taught him the true strength of trust and the power of forming bonds that transcended age, size, and expectation. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the grove, Take and Nayeli walked side by side, each step a testament to survival, to courage, and to the trust that had grown between them. The journey ahead would be long, the challenges many, but together they were ready to face them, united by the trials they had endured, and the understanding that sometimes the smallest hands can carry the heaviest burdens, and the most unexpected companions can become the truest heroes. Take's recovery had brought a fragile sense of peace to the small grove where Nayeli and her family lived. Days were filled with light work, tending small gardens, gathering water, and practicing careful movements to rebuild his strength. Yet even as he grew stronger, the shadow of danger lingered in his mind. The betrayal on the battlefield was not an isolated incident. There were enemies who would not rest until Take and his people were crushed. One morning, as the first rays of sun turned the plains a fiery gold, a distant rumble disturbed the calm. Take and Nayeli were collecting firewood near the edge of the grove when the sound reached their ears. A low, rhythmic pounding, like the march of many hooves. Nayeli froze, her eyes wide with alarm. "Take, do you hear that?" Take squinted toward the horizon. Dust clouds were rising far in the distance, moving with unnatural speed and coordination. His heart sank. "They've found us," he said grimly, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The militia. They didn't think I would survive. Now they're coming to finish what they started." Nayeli's small hands clenched at her sides. Fear surged briefly through her chest, but she quickly masked it with resolve. "Then we fight," she said simply, her eyes blazing with determination. "We won't let them take our home." Take knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We fight, yes, but wisely. Courage alone is not enough. We must plan, anticipate, and use the land to our advantage. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready," she said, her voice unwavering. "I've learned from you." The two of them spent the next hours preparing. Take knew he could no longer rely on brute force alone. His body was stronger than before, but far from its peak condition. Instead, he devised strategies based on stealth, terrain, and cunning. Rocks, fallen trees, and natural depressions in the land became obstacles for their enemies, while narrow paths and hidden vantage points offered opportunities for surprise attacks. Nayeli absorbed every instruction with incredible focus. She memorized the positions of trees, the locations of small ravines, and the patterns of the wind that carried sound. Take was impressed by her attention to detail and the uncanny way she understood the land's subtle cues. It reminded him of the finest scouts in his tribe, only she was far younger, yet just as perceptive. By afternoon, the dust clouds had grown larger, closer, and more ominous. The militia, underestimating the resilience of the Comanche leader they thought dead, pressed forward with arrogance. Their confidence made them predictable, a flaw Take intended to exploit. Take and Nayeli took their positions atop a ridge overlooking a narrow pass. From this vantage point, the enemy would have limited maneuverability, and every misstep could be fatal. Take handed Nayeli a small sharpened stick, not a weapon of battle, but a signal device. If they get too close, tap the ground 3 times. I will know to act immediately, he instructed. Nayeli nodded solemnly, gripping the stick tightly. Her small body trembled with anticipation, but her eyes were fierce, unwavering. I won't fail, she promised. As the first riders entered the pass, the plan went into motion. Take moved silently, positioning himself behind a large boulder that offered partial concealment. He observed the enemy's movements carefully, noting the stragglers, the guards, and the moments when their focus waned. Every detail was crucial. Every second counted. Then a misstep. A militia scout wandered too close to their hiding spot, alerting others with the sound of clinking gear. Nayeli's heart skipped a beat. She tapped the ground 3 times, just as Take had instructed. Take reacted instantly, launching a volley of arrows that struck with precision, sowing chaos among the enemy ranks. Nayeli's small voice rang out, signaling additional movements. She guided Take to shift positions, keeping the militia off balance and unable to form a coherent attack. Her intuition, sharpened by hours of observing the land, proved invaluable. Take marveled at how seamlessly she adapted to each situation, her mind quick and unyielding despite her youth. Hours passed in a tense dance of strategy, stealth, and careful strikes. The militia, frustrated by their inability to advance, became reckless. Take exploited every opportunity, using the terrain, his knowledge of the land, and Nayeli's guidance to set traps, force retreats, and isolate smaller groups for quick, decisive action. Finally, as the sun dipped low toward the horizon, the enemy began to falter. Exhaustion and panic overtook them, and Take seized the moment. With Nayeli signaling each move, they launched a coordinated counterattack that drove the militia back across the plains. Dust clouds rose behind them as they fled, leaving behind equipment, horses, and the humiliation of defeat. When the dust settled, Take allowed himself a rare moment of relief. He turned to Nayeli, whose face was streaked with sweat and dirt, but radiant with determination and triumph. You were extraordinary, he said, his voice full of admiration. I could not have done this without you. Nayeli's chest rose and fell rapidly. We did it together, she said, her small voice filled with pride. You taught me how to be brave. I just followed your lead. Take smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection to the child who had not only saved his life, but had now fought beside him as an equal, a partner in survival. He realized that courage was not measured by age, strength, or experience alone. It was measured by heart, resolve, and the willingness to act when others would hesitate. Nayeli embodied all of this and more. As night fell, the plains quieted once more. Take and Nayeli returned to the grove, exhausted but triumphant. The militia had been repelled, the immediate threat neutralized, and the bond between leader and child had been forged in fire and danger. Take's respect for Nayeli had grown beyond admiration. It was a trust born of shared trials, courage under fire, and unwavering determination. By the fire that night, Take reflected on the events of the past days, the betrayal that had nearly killed him, the long journey home, the slow healing, and now the return of the threat. He realized that life was unpredictable, often cruel, yet it also held moments of extraordinary bravery and unexpected alliances. Nayeli had proven that even the smallest and youngest among them could hold the power to shape the future. He reached out, placing a hand over Nayeli's as she sat beside him. "You've changed the course of my life," he said quietly. "Not just by saving me, but by showing me that courage comes in many forms. You've taught me to trust again, to hope again." Nayeli blushed slightly, her gaze dropping to the fire. "I just did what I had to," she said softly. "But I'm glad you see it that way." Take nodded, feeling a deep, unspoken bond between them. The journey ahead would not be easy. Threats still lingered, and the land would always demand vigilance. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope, bolstered by the bravery and trust of a child, who had become both his guardian and his ally. And so, as the stars twinkled above the plains, and the firelight danced across their faces, Take and Nayeli sat together, ready to face whatever came next, united, resilient, and stronger than any force that dared to challenge them. The sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a golden glow on the land that had once been a battlefield, then a sanctuary, and now a place of renewed hope. Take stood at the edge of the grove, his body stronger than it had been since the betrayal that had nearly claimed his life. His chest, once scarred and fragile, bore the marks of healing and resilience. Beside him, Nayeli adjusted the straps of a small pack, her face radiant with the quiet confidence that had grown within her over weeks of struggle and courage. The events of the past days weighed heavily on Take's mind, but the weight was no longer a burden. It was a reminder of survival, trust, and the power of courage in unexpected forms. The betrayal, the grueling journey home, the long days of healing, and the return of the enemy had all tested him in ways he could never have imagined. Yet, he had endured, and he had not endured alone. Nayeli looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Take," she said softly, "what happens now? Are we safe?" Lips curved into a thoughtful smile. "For now, yes. The militia has been driven back, and the land is ours to protect. But safety is never permanent. It must be earned every day, through vigilance, wisdom, and courage." He paused, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "And I trust that with you by my side, we can face whatever comes next." Nayeli's small hand found his, gripping it firmly. "I'll stay with you," she promised. "Always." Take felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that he had never felt before. The girl who had once been a child in the shadows of the battlefield had grown into a formidable ally, a beacon of courage and determination. She had saved his life, guided him to safety, and now stood beside him as a trusted companion. The first task was to secure the grove and ensure that the people living there were protected. Take and Nayeli moved among the homes, checking on families, reinforcing defenses, and teaching the villagers how to respond if the militia returned. Take shared strategies for using the land to their advantage, while Nayeli demonstrated the skills she had learned during their perilous journey. The observation of terrain, the setting of simple traps, and the courage to act decisively in moments of danger. By midday, the villagers had grown to respect both Take and Nayeli, marveling at the unlikely duo that had survived against overwhelming odds. Take, once feared and revered as a warrior, now felt something he had not experienced in years, a sense of community and shared purpose. Nayeli, who had always been small and underestimated, had become a symbol of hope and bravery for everyone who lived on the plains. As the days turned into weeks, Take regained his full strength. He practiced daily, his movements precise and fluid, his mind sharp and focused. Nayeli remained his constant companion, learning and growing alongside him. Together they patrolled the plains, mapped the terrain, and trained others in the ways of strategy and survival. Take marveled at her intuition and quick thinking, realizing that she had become more than a helper. She was a strategist, a guide, and a true partner. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, Take and Nayeli stood atop a hill overlooking the land. The wind carried the scent of grass, earth, and distant water, a reminder of the life that continued beyond the scars of battle. Take's gaze swept over the horizon, noting the strength and resilience of his people. "We've come a long way," he said quietly, almost to himself. Nayeli tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. "Do you think the militia will return?" "Perhaps," Take admitted. "But we are no longer the same people they faced before. We are stronger, wiser, and united. And as long as we protect one another, we will endure." The girl's eyes sparkled with determination. "Then let's make sure they never forget us," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. Take's heart swelled. He had always believed that courage could be found in warriors, in men trained for battle, in those who had faced death and survived. Yet Nayeli had taught him that bravery could also come in the smallest forms, from the most unexpected sources. She had shown him that courage was not defined by size, age, or experience, but by the willingness to act when others faltered. As the weeks passed, the bond between Take and Nayeli deepened into something that transcended simple companionship. They shared quiet moments by the fire, recounting stories of their past lives, dreams, and aspirations. Take spoke of the elders and warriors he had known, the lessons he had learned, and the wisdom he had gained through years of struggle. Nayeli shared her own hopes, dreams of exploring the plains, and a desire to learn all she could from him. One evening, as the sky turned shades of deep purple and gold, Nayeli asked, "Take, will you teach me everything? About the plains? About being brave? About everything?" Take smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, Nayeli, I will teach you everything I know. But remember, courage is also about knowing when to trust yourself. You have already proven that you are capable of incredible things. I will guide you, but you have the strength within you." The girl beamed, a mixture of pride and determination in her eyes. Together, they watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the world in a glow of possibility. The plains stretched endlessly before them, a land of challenges and opportunities, of danger and beauty. And together, Taki and Nayeli were ready to face it all, side by side, stronger and wiser than they had ever been before. Months passed, and the story of the Comanche leader who had been left for dead, and the little girl who had saved him, became legend among the villages. Taki regained full leadership of his people, his authority and wisdom recognized by all. Nayeli, though still a child, was celebrated for her courage and ingenuity. Together, they became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary bonds that can form in the face of adversity. One quiet morning, as the first light touched the plains, Taki knelt beside Nayeli. "You've changed my life," he said, his voice low and reverent, "not just by saving me, but by teaching me to see courage in new ways. I am grateful for you, Nayeli, and I will never forget what you have done." Nayeli reached up, placing a small hand on his cheek. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "We did it together, and we'll keep doing it together." Take smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. The plains stretched out before them, filled with endless possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that the future was not just something to survive, but something to embrace. The battles they had fought, the betrayals, the injuries, and the nights of fear and exhaustion had forged a bond unbreakable by any force. And so, as the wind carried the scent of grass and distant water across the plains, Take and Nayeli stood together, ready to face the future. The Comanche leader, who had once been left for dead, now thrived, guided by wisdom, courage, and the extraordinary friendship of a little girl whose bravery had saved a life, changed a destiny, and inspired a new beginning for all who called the plains home. Take had been reborn, not only as a warrior, but as a leader renewed by trust and hope. Nayeli had grown into her own strength, a reminder that even the smallest hands could shape the course of history. Together, they faced the horizon, champions of survival, courage, and the endless possibilities of life reborn.